My name's Greg Braden. I'd like to welcome you to this very special presentation of Missing Links, the deep truth of our origin, history, destiny, and fate. In the last episode, we discovered the scientific evidence for civilizations that simply don't fit the traditional timeline for our past. From Corral, Peru, and the Great Sphinx in Egypt to Turkey's Göbekli Tepe, now dated into the last ice age, we saw examples of evidence that was once discounted by science, but now it's scientifically accepted. Well, in this episode, I'm inviting you on a journey. And it's a journey that goes beyond what's accepted by conventional science today, the evidence that turns history upside down. And in some respects, it's going to sound like science fiction. The thing is, while these discoveries may sound like fiction, they're not. They're real. And because they are real, we have to make room for them in the story of our past. New dating techniques are now revealing brand new clues about the mystery of our past. And they're also revealing an entirely new class of artifacts that we've never seen before. They're called ep arts, which stands for out-of-place artifacts. So I want to talk to you about out-of-place artifacts. What are they? What do they mean? And what do they say to us about our past? The idea is that when we look into the earth, the deeper we go into the earth's crust, the older the rock layers become. It makes perfect sense. So the newer layers are on top, the older layers are at the bottom. And the reason that this is important is because scientists use this principle to help determine the age of artifacts. When they find an artifact deep in the earth, in a layer of coal, for example, the thinking is that the artifact had to be in place when that coal was being developed. In the case of coal, that means hundreds of thousands of years ago. So this is important. It was in the 1800s when technology brought us to the point where we could actually drill into the earth. And it was through the drill bits that were coming up in the coal seams of the Carolinas and Virginia here in America and in Russia and other parts of the world. All of a sudden, in these coal seams, the researchers began finding, and the engineers began finding, artifacts that simply should not be existing in those coal seams. They're called out-of-place artifacts because they don't fit the traditional timeline for what should have been happening in that layer of earth at the time. So I'm just going to share with you a sampling of these because we could do an entire program based only on out-of-place artifacts. But the point is, they begin to tell us a story. So let's look at some of the confirmed examples of out-of-place artifacts. And again, this is only a sampling of the discoveries that are being made. The first one I want to talk about, to me, is one of the most profound. It's called the Antikythera machine. It was actually discovered by divers off the shore of Crete in 1901. In 1901, the divers were looking for other kinds of artifacts, and they found this encrusted conglomerate of something they had never seen before. Now, bear in mind, this is 1901. This is the turn of 2 centuries ago. Not last century, but the century before. And when they brought this artifact to the surface, what they saw encrusted in the shells and in the sediment that was there were a series of gears, very sophisticated gears, in a way that had never been seen before. Well, they took this artifact, they preserved it, they couldn't explain it. And it wasn't until X-rays became a little bit more sophisticated that the X-rays were able to actually penetrate the sediment and revealed inside something even more profound, really sophisticated variable gears that interlock with one another in a way that had never been seen in the world before. The interesting thing is that the artifact was dated to about 80 BCE, before Common Era, which means it's over 2,000 years old. So the question is, over 2,000 years ago, number one, who had the technology to make this kind of gear? Number two, who had the technology to take these gears and apply them in a machine that is now being suspected as an astronomical device to help calculate the movements of stars and planets in the heaven in a way that we didn't see until the 20th century, later in the 20th century. So this is an example of an out-of-place artifact. But there are others. Now I'm going to go from some of the most recent backward in geologic time, just to give you a sense of what scientists are dealing with. Because remember, science is telling us through that pyramid of thinking that we saw in an earlier episode that civilization's only 5,000 years old. That's the problem when we start finding things like this. What you're looking at on your screen right now is a clay human figure that was found in Nampa, Idaho. It was discovered by drilling a well, it was a water well, 300 feet deep, and that 300 feet placed the drill into the geologic strata that we call the Pleistocene. So this is the Pleistocene age. That is about 1.2 million years before present. So just for reference, I mean, humans only appeared on Earth about 200,000 years ago, is what we're finding. So the question is, what is this clay figurine, a little bit larger than the size of an American dime you're seeing for scale on the screen? What is that figurine doing in Pleistocene strata that's now being dated at 1.2 million years? Scientists can't answer that. That is why it is an out-of-place artifact. Now we're going to go back a little further, and this is a particularly fascinating artifact for me. This is found in northern Russia, in Lubinsk. And if you look closely, what you're seeing in this piece of rock is what looks to be a microchip. It's a microchip that should not be where it is, because this rock comes from an even older period in geologic history. It comes from the Permian period. That's around 225 to 250 million years before present. This cannot be hoaxed, because this chip is actually embedded in the strata, and the strata was made 225 to 250 million years ago. How does this happen? What is it telling us about our past? This is one of the great mysteries that researchers are struggling with right now. But it goes even further. I live in northern New Mexico, and it was in New Mexico in 1987 that a researcher found what you're seeing on the screen right now, and it is just what it looks like. It is a human footprint. And it's not just a piece of a human footprint. This is a fully formed, very well developed human footprint. The problem is, this footprint is in Permian strata, a time from the Permian period that's about 290 million years before present. Again, just for reference, humans first appeared only 200,000 years ago. So what is a fully formed human footprint doing in strata that's 290 million years old? In the Ordovician period, a group of scientists discovered what you're seeing right now, and it's just what it looks like. This is an iron hammer on a wooden shaft. It was found in a town in Texas. It's called London, Texas. It was found in 1934. And this cannot be hoaxed. The shaft is actually embedded into the strata, and the wood in the shaft has been there so long it's actually becoming carbonized into coal. So the shaft of this hammer is turning into coal. How did this hammer get into 400 million year old strata? But it doesn't stop there. And I wanted to share this with you before we bring this all together and then take it to the next step. In South Africa, one of the great mysteries that was found years ago was an entire field of spheres that are made of a metal that is not native to our planet as we know it today. It's been combined, an alloy, in a way that does not happen naturally. But the thing is, the spheres are all machined. They have machined grooves around them. Some of them are very large. They're feet in diameter. Some of them are only a few centimeters or inches in diameter. You're seeing some on the screen right now. But here's the thing. These mysterious spheres in South Africa are now being dated, look at this, 570 million years before present. Now, I just want to give you some context. What you're seeing is a geologic map of time. You're seeing the most recent at the top, and the oldest strata, again, is at the bottom. And we've talked about the Permian, the Ordovician periods, the Pleistocene period near the top. These spheres are coming from a time at the bottom of the geologic timetable before life began. At this time, if there was life, it was only primitive, single cell, maybe amoebas, very primitive biological life. It's called pre-Cambrian period. So this is the mystery. What are these technologically advanced, machined spheres doing in South Africa at a time when not only are there no humans, but the most advanced forms of life known at that time were single cells? Now you're getting a sense of what out-of-place artifacts are all about. There are so many out-of-place artifacts. Scientists now, again, they put them into a separate pile and they said, these don't fit the traditional story. We're going to have to come back and look at these later. Well, later is now, because there are so many anomalies. They're saying there must be another story, or at the very least, the story that we've embraced is incomplete. So let me be really clear about this. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying there's a good chance that it's incomplete. We have only gleaned a small part of our true history. So the question is, how far back do these out-of-place artifacts go? But here's an even bigger question. Are they confined only to this planet? Are they confined only to Earth? Or is it possible we can find out-of-place artifacts in other places, maybe like the moon? Well, something very interesting has happened. In the year 2016, so very, very recently, NASA has just released its entire archive of lunar images taken of the lunar surface from the Apollo missions all the way from 1961 when they began through 1972. There are things on these images that NASA cannot explain, so they are called anomalous images. Some of them are so anomalous that they have been pixelated out so that we can't really see what they are, but we can still see the pixels. So there's something happening on the moon, and I want you to see some of these images, just a couple of them. I was an amateur archaeologist when I was in college, and one of the things, the very first things that I learned as an archaeologist is this. When we see 90-degree angles on an archaeological site, that tells us that it is in fact an archaeological site, that it is not a natural formation. Nature does not erode with wind in 90-degree angles, or nature does not erode through a stream or a river in 90-degree angles. So when you see a 90-degree angle like you're seeing on your screen right now, this is an excavated archaeological site that we're seeing an aerial view, and it's very clear to see the red lines are showing us where that 90-degree angle is. The next image that you're seeing, this is from the surface of the moon, and this is among the images that NASA released. You're seeing on the lower right-hand portion of the screen, you can see what looks like a little cube, and then in the upper right-hand portion, you're seeing what definitely is an enlargement of that cube. Those are definitely 90-degree angles. They are definitely made intentionally. They are not the result of erosion. The question is, what are they doing on the moon? We have been led to believe that the moon is a sterile surface, that there is no life existing on the moon, nor has there ever been. So when we begin to see things like this, and again, these images from 1961 through 1972, what do they mean? Well, if it was only one image, you'd say maybe it's just a trick of light, or a trick of light in shadow. But it's not just one image. I want you to see some of the other images that NASA is releasing. The Clementine mission to the moon came later, after the Apollo missions. So Clementine was a separate mission that went back to the moon, maybe to look a little closer at some of the anomalies that Apollo was seeing. And it's the Clementine images that we're finding pixelated, although they are released to the public. So you're seeing one now. There's obviously something here in the image that you're seeing that for whatever reason, we're not being allowed to see. What could that be on the surface of the moon? What is the out-of-place artifact that we're not seeing? Here's another one that looks more like some kind of a tower, perhaps, of some kind, or an obelisk that's been pixeled out. These are from the Clementine mission. Now, when people see things like this on the moon, the first thing that comes to mind is aliens, ETs, UFOs, things like that. And I fully believe, I'm certain, that we are not alone in this universe. It would make no sense for us to be. And that there's an overwhelming body of evidence suggesting now that other life forms have been with us for a very long time, both in our world and in other worlds. The astronauts have talked about this, those that have been interviewed. But I'm going to give you just a little bit different perspective. This is the year 2016. We are living a time of extremes. We are living a time when the cycles of conflict are ramping up through the year 2020. You don't need me to tell you that. You can feel the tension in the world, the push toward war. Doesn't mean that war needs to happen, but there are multiple places and hotspots where you can see right now it wouldn't take much to create that. Okay, at the same time, something else is happening. During the Cold War years, there were only two nations that had the money and the technology to go to the moon. It's the former USSR, former Soviet Union, and the former United States of America. And I have to say that because both nations are so broke right now that we're not going back to the moon, at least in the way that we have in the past. But there are other nations that are going to the moon. During the Cold War, even though the former Soviet Union and former United States of America were at war on one level, it was a very civilized war in some respects because there were agreements among scientists on other levels. One of those agreements was that things that were found on the moon, for whatever reason, were not publicly shared among the people of the earth at the time. And I'm not going to say it's right, wrong, good, or bad. There were research programs that said that certain kinds of information could disrupt the fabric of society and overturn religious beliefs. And again, it was another world. This was the 60s and the 70s. But the point is, those agreements were honored, and I think that's one of the reasons we're not seeing some of these images. The nations that are now on their way to the moon, the nations that have the money and the technology and the will to return, were not part of those agreements. China, for example, India, are both on their way to the moon. And both nations have said that when they land on the moon, they will televise to the people of the earth whatever it is that they find live as they find it. Here's why I believe this is important. And this is a place where I'm moving beyond peer-reviewed science. I'm sharing with you my perspective, my sense, my belief. When we find those out-of-place artifacts on the moon, when we find archaeological remnants of intentional civilization in a place where we used to be hoping to find microbes. We were looking for life, hoping to find microscopic life, and now we're finding entire temple complexes, is what appears to be on those images. When we find those, my sense is that we're going to discover something that could be the most powerful, the most unifying experience the people, our global family, the people of Earth could ever have. Because my sense is that when we go into those ancient sites, we're going to find the hieroglyphs on the walls. We're going to find writing in languages that we already know. In the original languages called root languages of the earth: Hebrew, Sanskrit, cuneiform, Arabic. And the reason we're finding them there is because those sites are not necessarily alien ET UFO sites. I believe they are sites that were developed by us from another cycle of another civilization. When we worked together as a family on this planet, when we cooperated and achieved great and beautiful things. And my question is, if we were able to do things like that in the past, how much further could we go if we did the same thing right now with what we know today? But here's the beauty. Here we are on the verge of war, at a time when the cycles are converging, creating the tension in the time of extremes, and at exactly that time, we may find the evidence of us from another time that has the power to unify us rather than divide us. And I think we're going to see that very soon in our lifetimes. So what would that mean? What would it mean if we found something like that? Then when we look at the advanced civilizations on Earth, why did those civilizations collapse? What happened in the past? Is there something that could have happened then that we've forgotten? Or maybe we chose to forget because whatever it was so painful, we didn't want to carry it into future civilizations. Well, I want to share with you another out-of-place artifact, an ancient clue That is happening in what is now Pakistan. It is in an area, it used to be between India and Pakistan, ancient sites, archaeological sites, such as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. And we've known about these sites for a while. They're about 5,000 years before present is when we say they originated. Interestingly, it's the beginning of the last cycle. It also happens to be at the time of the last great climate change. What we're finding is evidence of an advanced society. An advanced society that had things in their time that we have in ours today. They had knowledge of mathematics and chemistry, architecture, advanced architecture, multi-story buildings. They had closed indoor plumbing, hot and cold running water, flush toilets, stained glass in their windows. They even had buried pipelines where there have been wires and remnants of cables and what are believed to be ancient batteries have been found in these sites. So clearly, these were not primitive grass huts. These were advanced technological civilizations, and they had more. They had amazing art, beautiful art, using techniques of sculpture that we're only beginning to use now in the 20th century. But there are a lot of mysteries in these sites. And one of the mysteries is this. When the archaeologists began to uncover the sites, they found human skeletons. The skeletons were not arranged randomly. They were toward one end of the city, and to quote the words of one of the archaeologists, they were in postures of flight. That means they were running from something. They were moving in one direction. Some of the skeletons, the bodies were holding one another for comfort. Some of them were families, some of them were individuals. There were animals that were some with them. They had their pets. But here's the thing. Some of those skeletons have a higher degree of radioactivity than they should have just from being in the ground, from background radiation. And this has been a big mystery to the scientists for a long time. You're seeing an image on your screen, an actual photograph of some of the bodies and the way they're arranged right now. They're also finding, the scientists, archaeologists, also began to find evidence of what is called vitrified stone. What that means is that in the walls of the homes, for example, or in the floors made of quartz or granite that is made of quartz and feldspar and mica, some of the minerals, while they're still in place, they've been exposed to a heat that was so intense it melted the minerals in place. A high, intense, rapid heat that melted these minerals in place. And one of the mysteries, the archaeologists began to find these mysterious lumps of something. And it took them a while to understand that what they were looking at, these were lumps of clay that used to be clay vases and clay dolls that were children that had also been vitrified. They were exposed to a rapid, intense heat. They were melted so quickly. All that's left now is a stone ball. So these kinds of things are the mysteries to the scientists. They're saying, what happened? What could have happened in this part of the world? Well, this is one of those places where you have to look beyond the evidence. If you look only at the evidence, you'll never understand what it is that happened. We need context. And some of that context is coming from the oral traditions of this part of the world, from the Hindu traditions of the Mahabharata, and specifically in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a small portion of the Mahabharata. This portion of the Mahabharata tells a story of an ancient battle that happened between two advanced civilizations a long time ago. It doesn't give the exact dates. And as these two civilizations clashed, one of them began to lose the battle, and they resorted to using a weapon that had never been used before, a technology that had never been used before. And they wrote about what the effects of this weapon were in a way that made no sense until the 20th century, because we had nothing to compare it to. I'd like to read portions of this to you for accuracy right now. So the ancient Mahabharata says specifically, and I'm going to read these texts as a quote, "A single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 1,000 suns, rose in all its splendor. A perpendicular explosion with its billowing smoke clouds, the cloud of smoke rising after its first explosion formed into expanding round circles like the opening of giant parasols. It's this next piece that I think is so telling. This is a direct quote. It says, "It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Varishnis and the other people who were there. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. The hair and the fingernails fell out, pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white in the sky and fell. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves into the streams to wash themselves and their equipment." Where did that description come from? What could have been seen in the eyes of the people living in Mohenjo-daro 5,000 years ago to prompt them to describe something that made no sense until the 20th century? Does Mohenjo-daro offer evidence of the unthinkable? And this is a question that scientists are asking themselves right now. The father of the nuclear age, the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, after the detonation of the first nuclear device, he was being interviewed at Rochester University, and the interviewer asked Robert Oppenheimer a question. And it's such a telling question. The answer that he gave was so unexpected. Listen to the question, listen to the answer. The student asked Mr. Oppenheimer, he said, "How do you feel after having exploded the first atomic bomb on Earth?" Oppenheimer answered, and he said, "Well, not the first atomic bomb." He said, "But the first atomic bomb in modern times."
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Interestingly, Robert Oppenheimer was a student of the Mahabharata. He was a student of the Bhagavad Gita. And he is famously quoted as witnessing that first mushroom cloud, as saying under his breath, "I have become death, the destroyer of worlds," which is a direct quote from the Mahabharata. So Robert Oppenheimer firmly believed that there have been nuclear devices on this earth from advanced civilizations in the past, and he's not alone. Other scientists have sensed the same thing because they see the trajectory of civilization and how the cycles ebb and flow and where we are in the cycles today. Well, this is all conjecture, but it wasn't until Google Earth began looking at this part of the world from another perspective, from satellites, that they found what you're seeing on your screen right now. This is a Google Earth image. It is obviously a crater. The first thing that scientists did when they saw this crater in the area of these archaeological sites, they said, well, maybe an asteroid hit the Earth a long time ago. When they excavated through the bottom of this crater, they found no evidence of any kind of impact from an asteroid. So the fact that this crater exists, the fact that we have vitrified stone, that we have vitrified clay vases and toys from children, we have radioactive skeletons in postures of flight in an ancient city that is described in the text as being the victim of an ancient war, using a weapon that had never been used before. It brings all of this to a focus and says, have we been here before? Have we done this in the past? Are we unconsciously living a cycle where technology advances in one particular way at one particular time to the point where we are given the ability to preserve or destroy all that we love, all that we cherish, all that we hold dear? And are we at that point right now? That's the question that we need to ask. So we owe it to ourselves to answer this question. What happened? What happened to Mohenjo-Daro so long ago? What can we learn from what they left behind? Well, in our next episode, we're going to take this exploration beyond the temples and the walls of advanced civilizations from the past. We're going to discover the single truth that has been so fundamental to every ancient technological and indigenous civilization in the past. It's a deep truth that a new discovery is forcing modern science now to embrace. Thank you for joining me for this program today, and be sure to tune in for our next all-new episode, Missing Links, the deep truth of our origin, history, destiny, and fate.